This week on HomeKit News, the Aqara FP300 presence multi-sensor with Matter, Thread and Zigbee. Welcome back everybody. Today we're looking at a highly anticipated device, namely the Aqara FP300, a multi-sensor that combines two types of motion detection along with additional sensors. These two motion detection options are first a PIR sensor to quickly detect motion in order to trigger scenes or automations, and a millimeter wave presence sensor to actually detect presence rather than just motion. Like many of Aqara's newer releases, this offers either Matter over Thread, so essentially hub-free, or with Zigbee, which requires a hub but offers extra functionality via the Aqara app. It also comes with an ambient light sensor which can help with determining the circumstances for how an automation should be triggered. There are even temperature and humidity sensors built in, and best of all, unlike previous sensors, this can run on batteries, so no unsightly dangling cables to hide. Okay, so what's in the box on this occasion? Of course, we've got the FP300 itself, which I'll look at more closely later on. We get some literature, although it's mostly for initial installation only. There's a double-sided adhesive sticker to mount the sensor via the base of the round stand. There's also a metal disc you can use with the sticker, which is used magnetically with the sensor's base, as you can see. Finally, if you don't want to use the adhesive sticker, you can use the provided screw and roll plug. Let's take a closer look at the FP300 now, starting with one edge that has a pairing and reset button. This also acts as a shortcut to updating certain settings. Below that is a small plastic latch for accessing the battery compartment. The opposite edge features a couple of small vents which are for the temperature and humidity sensors to sample the surrounding air. To one side is a Matter code in both QR and digit formats, and you'll only need this if you plan on adding it directly to a Matter platform other than Aqara. The front is the main part of the sensor, which houses both the PIR and presence sensors, whilst also containing an activity LED. There's a section at the top. This is home to the ambient light sensor, which is going to help with the two main sensors. So as you can see, the stand is quite adjustable with a ball joint at one end of the mount, which allows for most positions to be achieved. I'm also happy to report that unlike the battery compartment for the P1 and P2 motion sensors, this is very easy to access. You just need a small screwdriver to access the batteries themselves. So the FP300 can be added directly to any Matter platform, including Aqara, and once powered should be automatically discovered by your platform of choice. You also have the option to add it to Aqara using Thread or Zigbee, and I'm going for the latter in this case. It'll warn you that the protocol will switch, so once I've confirmed my choice, it'll start transferring the firmware needed for it to use Zigbee instead of Thread, which doesn't take long. Now that it's in Zigbee mode, I just select the hub it's going to pair with, although note that it wouldn't pair with my panel hub S1 Plus for some reason, so I went with the M1S for now. That's now connected, so I get the sensor for presence, temperature, humidity and light. Note that there was no mention of a separate PIR sensor, for the reason for which I'll explain in a bit. So in Aqara you can see it shows absence or presence along with data for light, temperature and humidity. There's a log section for each sensor as well, which may or may not be of use to you. If we go into the settings for the device, there's a fair bit of choice. The presence detection option partly explains why you don't see a separate motion sensor, with the recommended setup using both motion and presence in combination, although you can use just one or the other if you prefer. You can also adjust the sensitivity of the sensors, combined or otherwise, and you can also set the delay time before the presence sensor reports absence, with the minimum being 10 seconds to a maximum of 5 minutes. The LED light can be set to turn off between certain hours if required, or left off entirely, which is how I've set it. Regarding the light, temperature and humidity settings, you can adjust how often these report their current states, but if you don't need any of these, you can turn them off, saving battery life. As is the case with Aqara's other presence sensors, you can adjust the detection range, which in this case comes with this handy slider interface to adjust that detection range. This seems to affect both presence and motion, although I'm not 100% sure. Other than that, there are the usual other options. So for example, I can check the Zigbee signal strength, which is excellent given that the hub and sensor are both in our corridor. So where should I place the FP300? The main candidate is our guest bathroom, which I may end up using eventually, but not for the purposes of this video. It could go in our main bathroom, which would replace two current sensors, an old FP1 presence sensor and an even older Xiaomi motion sensor. For now though, I'm going with the corridor to test out a specific type of automation. We'll come back to that in a minute, but for now let's look at the FP300 in Apple Home. So I'm in the corridor page in my Apple Home app with all the relevant sensors at the top. For temperature, you can see it's currently listed as presence sensor, although I'll change that later. It sits alongside an existing hue sensor. I can also check the battery levels from here as standard, and the humidity sensor is also listed as presence for now, showing the current humidity and battery levels. Going into motion sensors, there's a slight disappointment in that the FP300 doesn't expose the PIR sensor separately, just like in the Aqara app. So as it stands, only my hue motion sensor shows up in this section. If we go into presence sensors, you can see my Aqara P2 is listed alongside the FP300, even though the P2 is actually just a motion and light sensor. Once again, battery levels are listed as well as whether occupancy or presence is detected. The last of the sensors is the light sensor, and as you can see, I have light sensors for the FP300, the hue motion sensor and the P2 motion sensor, so I'm well covered in that regard. The details show the light level in lux and once again battery levels. So apart from the motion sensor not showing separately, we do get 4 sensors showing up in total, which is still pretty good. I did mention that for this video I was going to test it in the corridor for a specific automation. So currently there's a hue motion sensor placed facing the door to our master bedroom, which you can see here, with the Aqara P2 perched above that master bedroom door. Now we have an ensuite bathroom facing the bedroom door, and so if we go to the bathroom, the hue motion sensor is triggered even if we don't go into the corridor, which is less than ideal. Additionally, with the P2 placed above the door to actually trigger the corridor lights to turn on, it will unfortunately trigger those lights to turn on when someone is going back into the bedroom. So my fix, while not perfect, does the job. So first I have a simple automation using the P2 so that when motion is detected, i.e. when I go from the bedroom door to the corridor between 5 PM and 11:30 PM, it'll turn the corridor lights on. Fairly straightforward. Then I have a second automation involving the FP300 and the previous automation I mentioned. In this second automation, if motion or presence is detected by the FP300, there will be a 1-second delay, after which the P2 automation will be turned off. Another 10-second delay occurs before that automation is then re-enabled. So when the P2 detects motion, the corridor lights turn on, and then the FP300 also detects motion and or presence shortly after, due to settings for the detection range in the FP300 being fairly short. There's also a separate automation in Apple Home that turns the corridor lights off when there's no occupancy. So let's see this in action. I walk towards the corridor from my bedroom, the P2 triggers the lights to come on, and once the FP300 detects me, and after a 1-second delay, the P2 automation is also disabled for 10 seconds. On the return trip, the P2 won't trigger even if it's active, as the FP300 will detect me first and once again turn off that P2 automation. So how did we arrive at the FP300? I've been using Aqara stuff since about 2018, and at the time they didn't have their own motion sensors, so I was using Xiaomi's own sensors, which were in fact made by Aqara's parent company, Lumi United. Then they released their own Aqara branded ones, which came with basic light sensors, one of which I still use in the kitchen. In China, they also released their high-precision motion sensor, which can be fitted flush into ceilings like I have here. The company's first presence sensor was the FP1, which was only released in China and to be honest wasn't too great. Then we saw the P1 motion and light sensor using Zigbee, closely followed by the identical-looking P2, which uses matter over thread. Aqara's second attempt at a presence sensor, the FP2, was a lot better and I'd argue is still their best, and one I still use today. It does use Wi-Fi but not Zigbee. Following this, there was a device that looked identical to their original FP1, labelled the FP1E, which was a lot better than the first attempt but is scaled down in features compared to the FP2. And now we have the FP300, so let's take a final look at the pros and cons. As is increasingly the case these days, we start with Matter over Thread, which is the ultimate combination for many, and one that frees you to some extent from other ecosystems and hubs, of course. For me, I went with Zigbee on this occasion, as I know where I stand when something goes offline, which can sometimes be hard to track down with Matter over Thread devices. It's good to have the choice all the same. Having motion and presence in one device does give you the best of both worlds, and so is a no-brainer for the ultimate detection device, as you both have speed and accuracy. As this is battery operated, you don't have to worry about dangling cables and how to hide them, so for many that's an obvious plus. The 3 additional sensors, temperature, humidity and light, are all great bonuses, although I'd say the light sensor is the most useful of the 3 when combined with the motion and presence sensors. The only slight downside is that the motion and presence sensors aren't separately exposed to Apple Home. In all honesty though, it doesn't seem to matter much in practice. All in all, this is probably the go-to motion and presence sensor device for smart home users, especially given the option to use Thread or Zigbee along with multiple additional sensors. So that's our take on the FP300 from Aqara. Does this tick all the right boxes for you in terms of motion and presence, or are you still happy with the FP2 and its 30 zones? Let me know in the comments section below, and if you've got any questions on this or any of my other videos, ask away and I'll always reply. In the meantime, if you enjoyed this video, please show some love by giving it a like, share if you can, and do subscribe if you haven't done so already. It just remains for me to leave you with this week's quote, this time from the King of Comedy, Stan Laurel.